The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 6, The Violet Keystone. Chapter 11. The water was freezing cold, but the shield maiden who had been through once already said that the flooded tunnel was only 12 stretches long before it sloped up into the air again. 12 stretches wasn't very far, Milla thought. She suppressed a shiver as she took another step and the water rose above her waist. Something rippled in the water next to her, and she almost struck at it with the talon before she realized it was Audrus swimming. Even as a spirit shadow, Audrus liked water. It was the stuff of life for a storm shepherd in Einir. Or part of it, anyway. Air and water. That's what they were made of. Air, water, and magic. 2 shield maidens were close behind Milla, helping Grail's spirit shadow with its mistress, who was still very weak. Milla was pleased with the shimmering globe of green light that surrounded Grail's head. It seemed to be working properly. She took another step, and the water gripped at her neck. It was so cold it constricted her lungs. Still, she told herself, it was not as cold as a windstorm out on the ice. Milla breathed in and out slowly, several times. Then she took the breath that would have to last her through the flooded tunnel. As the last of it filled her lungs, she pushed forward, keeping one hand against the wall so she would keep going in the right direction. The water was too dirty and dark to see in, even with a sunstone. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. It was hard going, walking underwater. The floor beneath her was slippery too, so she had to be careful. If she slid over, she might get turned around, or smack her head and lose her precious breath. 4 steps. 5 steps. 6 steps. That had to be 2 stretches, surely. But she'd been taking smaller steps than usual, so maybe it wasn't. Already she felt short of air, the cold pressing on her lungs and throat. Maybe she'd become weaker since she'd been to Einir and lost her natural shadow. Maybe wielding the talon and using light magic had weakened her too. She was used to having magical or spirit shadow help, and some of her toughness had leaked away. Surely such a small crossing underwater wouldn't have worried her before. 10 steps. Or was it 11? Milla tried to move faster through the water. Her breath was almost gone, and she couldn't bear the shame of drowning, or almost drowning and having to be rescued. That shield maiden Jorl had been through twice already, and hadn't been bothered at all. She had to keep going. It could only be a few more steps. Unless she'd somehow found another branch of the tunnel. What if Jorl had been lucky and gone straight through, but Milla had somehow ended up taking a side passage? Maybe she was walking even deeper underwater, into blacker depths from which there would be no return. A second later, she burst out into air and light, gasping a heartfelt breath. Ebbitt was standing farther up a ramp ahead, the green globe still around his head, not as bright as it had been.
"What took you so long?" he asked. "We have a locomotor to catch."
Milla climbed out of the water and up the ramp to Ebbitt. Then she shook herself, sending a spray across the old man. He flinched and grimaced, and muttered about something called towels, but didn't retreat. There was a loud splash below. Grail and the 2 shield maidens emerged, Grail completely calm, but shivering, the 2 ice carls spluttering and gasping for breath. As soon as they looked up, Milla slowed her own breathing. She knew that a leader must try to appear calm and capable at all times. But she wasn't sure whether the shield maidens were fooled, particularly when they'd immediately tried to disguise their own panting for more air. The next ice carl to arrive was the wilder, Jarek. He was still emerging from the strange condition that came when the berserk fury left. He seemed unaffected by the crossing, but did not speak or even look at anyone else. He trudged up the ramp and stood cradling his chain, his eyes blank. Perhaps it was actually grief from the loss of his companion, Milla thought as she cast a cautious glance at him, and not the after-effects of the fury. She did not know much about wilders.
Hurry up, chanted Ebbitt. "I told you we have a locomotor to catch."
"This is not a time for hunting.
We must get to the violet levels as quickly as we can, Milla said impatiently. What is a locomotor, anyway? Some sort of beast?
You'll see, explained Ebbitt. But it is not for hunting. Oh, no. We will catch it to ride it, and it will take us to the first part of the way we have to go to get to where we're going.
The violet levels, reiterated Milla. She wanted to be absolutely sure Ebbitt knew where they wanted to go, though even with constant repetition, there was no guarantee. We're all here, War Chief, called Salson from the bottom of the ramp. As Milla half expected, the shield mother was hardly out of breath, and didn't even look as wet, bedraggled, and cold as everybody else.
Come,
said Ebbitt. He led the way to the top of the ramp, and then along a sandy tunnel that cut straight through the rock, without smooth walls or stonework. There were no sunstones set in the ceiling here, and the only light came from the stones of Milla and Ebbitt, aided by a dim glow from Grails. The tunnel went on for a long way. After a while, Milla heard a strange noise coming from up ahead. It sounded a little like the metal workers of the Firekeeper clan, the Icecarls who held the secret of turning rocks into metal. They were the only ones who could use the special rock that was sometimes found around the hot pools of Galt, or which fell from the sky like sunstones. The metal they made wasn't as good as the golden metal of the ancients, but it was prized just the same. The ring of metal and the dull thud of stone grew louder as they kept on. Ebbitt obviously heard it, but was not concerned. Milla decided that if he wasn't, she wouldn't be either. The Icecarls took their lead from her.
Careful now,
warned Ebbitt. He slowed down and held his sunstone higher. Milla tensed, her talon hand ready. Audrys, seeing that, slipped back.
The tunnel ends above the locomotor road, up ahead, said Ebbitt. We have to drop into one of the locomotor buckets, which will carry us along to a point where we can go by steam. Some of us, anyway.
What is a locomotor, and what is one of their buckets? Asked Milla. Ebbitt didn't reply, but he gestured Milla to come forward and join him. Together they walked slowly forward. The light from their sunstones lit the way ahead, the tunnel walls giving way to a much larger open space where their light could only partly banish the darkness. The tunnel ended at a cliff, partway up the side of a large cavern. Below them, on the floor of the cavern, was a strange path that led into the darkness, a path that was marked by 3 metal lines, each about a stretch apart. Something moved out of the darkness, something about the size of a juvenile Selski. It took Milla only a moment to recognize that it was not a living thing, but the source of the hammering sound. It was just a box of metal, open at the top, balanced on a platform that had 2 big wheels running on the outside metal lines. There were also little toothed wheels at each end, clacking along on the metal line in the middle.
A locomotor bucket, explained Ebbitt. The locomotor is at the back. It pushes the buckets around on those metal lines, which are called rails. There are many locomotors, each one pushing 10 buckets. They come out of the darkness below, rise to where we want to go, and then disappear down into the darkness again.
Milla kept staring as more and more of the wheeled boxes Ebbitt called buckets came into view. As he'd said, there were 10 of them, all of them pushed along with a strange locomotor. Unlike the buckets, the locomotor appeared to be, at least partially alive, a thing of strangely pulsing gray flesh that sat on the same kind of wheeled platform. The blob of flesh had powerful arms, each as long as a grown Icecarl, that turned the wheels. But there was no skin covering these limbs. Milla could see the muscles tensing and relaxing, and the sheen of bone.
Line up along here, Ebbitt instructed. When an empty bucket is beneath us, we just jump down.
Where do we get out? Asked Milla. She had a vision of the strange locomotor pushing them somewhere they didn't want to go, deep beneath the castle.
There is a place ahead where the line steepens, and the locomotors stop to gather their strength. We jump out there, right next to an underfolk passage that goes to a steam riser, and also out to Red 5.
Where does the locomotor go after that? Ebbitt shrugged.
Down again,
he said.
I don't know where. One day I'll find out.
The first bucket drew level with them as Ebbitt finished speaking. It was traveling not much faster than a walk, and was only 4 or 5 stretches below. An easy jump for an ice carl. Even Grail, aided by her spirit shadow, could do it, Milla thought.
Everyone line up along the edge here, ordered Milla. We'll jump in the last 2 buckets. No, not the last 2, interrupted Ebbitt. Stay at least 1 bucket away from the locomotor.
Milla looked at him.
It has extra arms as well as the ones that turn the wheels, said Ebbitt. And somewhere under all that flesh, I believe there is a mouth.
Milla wasn't sure whether to believe him, but it was better to err on the side of safety.
You have done this before, haven't you? She asked.
Ebbitt smiled. Get ready to jump, said Salson, who had kept her eye on the buckets and was timing their passage. Avoid the last bucket, as instructed.
You have, haven't you?
Milla asked again. Ebbitt kept smiling, but made no move to answer.
Jump!
Salson shouted.